Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this International Space University and University of South Australia International Astronaut panel. My name's Michael Davis. I'm the co-director of the program, and we are delighted with the number of members of the public, mums and dads and kids, as well as all the space enthusiasts that I recognise. We're delighted to welcome you all. I'm also delighted to welcome Dr Gordon Cable from the Australasian Society of Aerospace Medicine, our sponsor this evening, and I'll ask Gordon to say a few words later in the program. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the many supporters of this program, without whose assistance we wouldn't be able to do it. And in particular, I wish to thank the Sir Roth and Sir Keith Smith Fund, the Secure World Foundation, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration of the US, otherwise known as NASA, the European Space Agency, Engineers Australia, the Mount Barker District Council, who will be hosting our stratospheric satellite project at Mount Barker on Australia Day, and watch the media for reports of that, and the South Australian Department of Environment, Water and Natural Resources. It's my role this evening to introduce our moderator, and we're very honoured to have with us the President of the International Space University, Professor Walter Peeters. Walter has been Dean and President of this university for many years, but his original career was with the European Space Agency, where he was strongly involved in human space missions. This included the design of a European human spacecraft called Hermes, and later he had the function of coordinator at the European Astronaut Office in Cologne in Germany. In that function, he participated in the selection of the first European Astronaut Corps and was manager of the first two long-duration missions of European astronauts in Russia. And they were called Euromir 94 and Euromir 95. It gives me great pleasure to invite Walter Peeters to be the moderator this evening.
Thank you, Martin. So a great audience we have today. I'm very pleased to see so many people interested in the program, as Michael said. When we were discussing about the program, we thought to give it a little bit of a twist, and we thought we're going to make it like a mini SSP. That means letting you taste a little bit from everything. And before I'm going to introduce the astronauts, we thought it might be good as background information, of course not for the participants because they have already this background information, but for all of you, to invite two experts to say a few things about human spaceflight. And I think we cut it in two different objectives or views. And first I'm going to introduce somebody who has been most of his career involved in designing missions, human space missions, missions to Mars, and looking at spacecraft for humans. After he obtained his mechanical engineering degree and a degree in engineering management, he worked for NASA. He was also special assistant to the astronaut office in NASA, and it might be worthwhile for all of you that he was also in the last short list of astronauts to be selected. So at the moment he's ISU faculty and detached from NASA as director of this program. So I ask you to welcome John Connolly, an expert.
All right, thank you everybody. As Walter said, we're going to give you a little taste of what we teach at International Space University. And I call this little 10-minute presentation, Making You All Rocket Scientists in 10 Minutes. So that's what we're going to do. How many of you have seen the movie The Martian? That's good. You're my kind of people. Well, you may remember that in The Martian, we had an astronaut that had to overcome a great deal of challenges. And so what I wanted to talk about today are, what are the big engineering challenges that we have to overcome to send people to Mars? Growing potatoes, by the way, is not on the top of the list. So what I'm going to talk about today is something that engineers and physicists love to talk about, but I'm going to make it entertaining. I'm going to talk about our three most challenging things, and those are distance, velocity, and time. Now, you'll notice that our planet here is about 13,000 kilometers in diameter, and over to the right, I've shown what the height of the International Space Station is. The ISS flies only about 400 kilometers above the planet. That's as far as humans have ventured from our planet since 1972, when we came back from the moon. When we go to Mars, things are going to be much different. So I'm going to start zooming out here just to give you a little perspective of how far we have to travel. So finally now we could see the moon. And the moon is about 385,000 kilometers away. That's the furthest humans have ever been away from our home planet. But I'm going to keep zooming out. So there's the Earth and the moon again. Now you can't even see the moon. It just becomes less than a pixel. And so I've drawn a little circle where the moon circles the Earth. It's about 750,000 kilometers in diameter. And I'm going to keep zooming back out. So there's the Earth, just that little blue dot in the middle, with the moon going around it, and off it goes, and off it goes, and off it goes. And finally, we get to a point where we could see the orbit of another planet. So the orbit of the Earth is in blue, the orbit of Venus is in yellow. Now, Venus is not a place you would want to go with people. It's incredibly hot, the pressures are crazy high, and it has an atmosphere made of sulfuric acid. It is probably the worst place you could ever send a human. But I'm going to keep zooming out. So there's Earth and Venus in their orbit around the sun. We can now pick up the orbit of Mercury in orange. And now we can define a fundamental unit in aerospace that's called the astronomical unit. 150 million miles is the distance between the sun and the Earth, and we call that 1 AU. Now keep that in mind because we're not at Mars yet. So we keep zooming out. Finally, we see the red orbit of Mars coming in. So we have the sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. And I'm going to get rid of Mercury and Venus because those really aren't places we would ever send humans. And we're just going to talk about how we get from the Earth to Mars. So remember, this is distance. The distance from the sun to the Earth is 150 million kilometers. From the sun to Mars, 230 million kilometers. That means that if you do some subtraction, it's 80 million kilometers when the Earth and Mars are at their closest point. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any kind of rockets that can just take us directly across that gap. What you have to do is you have to understand physics and how you get from one planet to another. And here's why it's difficult. Well, it's because of velocity. So the first thing we have to do is we have to somehow get off the surface of the Earth and into orbit around the Earth. And that means that we have to go from a standing start to 28,100 kilometers per hour. That's Earth orbital velocity. So we need a big rocket to do that. But when you're in orbit around the Earth, that's not enough. You further have to increase your velocity to break free of the gravity of Earth to put you into interplanetary space so you can travel to Mars. That means you have to further increase your velocity by 14,400 kilometers an hour. These are big numbers. Now, when we get to Mars, luckily we can use the atmosphere of Mars to slow down, so we don't have to use rocket engines to do that. So I'm going to bookkeep that as 0. We can use the atmosphere to help us slow down. But the atmosphere of Mars is thin. It's not like our nice thick atmosphere here. It's only about 1% of our atmosphere. So we are going to have to use rocket engines eventually at the end of our mission to land, and that's going to cost us another 3,000 kilometers an hour that we have to decelerate. Then we finally get to the surface and we could perform our surface mission. That doesn't take any velocity at all other than your rover. Then to get home, we have to do the whole thing in reverse. We have to leave the gravity well of Mars and get into Mars orbit, and then break free of the gravity of Mars and head back to Earth. And that'll cost us another 27,000 kilometers an hour. Once we get to Earth, we can use the atmosphere of Earth to slow down, so no fuel needed for that, and finally deploy our parachutes and splash down. Now, when you add all those numbers up, the total amount of change of velocity, which we call delta V in the space business, that means the amount you have to speed up or slow down is 72,500 kilometers an hour. That's a lot. That's a lot of work that rockets have to do. And that's why one of our second big challenge is velocity, because somehow you have to change your velocity to get to Mars and back by 72,500 kilometers an hour. Unfortunately, these days we don't have magic rockets. We just have chemical rockets. So that means we have to burn rocket fuel to do that. Our third challenge is time. Now this is interesting, because now we understand the distances between the planets. We understand how much velocity it takes to get us from one to the other, but how much time does it take? Well, there's two ways to get to Mars, and only two ways right now. This is called the short stay Mars mission. And so I've shown this starting at Earth, and that's the blue circle. So that's our starting point. We leave Earth, we take a 7-month trip to Mars, and we arrive at the red circle. And we spend 30 days on Mars, and then we come back. Now the problem with this kind of mission is, at the time we want to come back from Mars, Earth has half-circled the sun already and is out of position for where we want it to be when we return. So we have to actually do a pretty crazy maneuver where we cut inside the orbit of Venus. That's Venus, that's the place we really don't want to go. But we have to use it for a gravity assist to kick us back to Earth that's all the way over on the other side of the sun. In order to do this, this is going to take 13 months in space. So this whole mission is over 1.5 years in duration, and all we've been able to spend on the surface is 30 days. But there's another way. This is called the long stay Mars mission, or is what we call the conjunction class mission in astronautics. So again, we have to leave Earth on our little trajectory that takes us to Mars for 7 months. But now we stay on Mars until Mars and Earth come back into the proper position for us to come home again. That means we have to stay on Mars for about 500 days. And if we do that, then we have that quick little 7-month trip home again. So now the whole mission is 7 months to Mars, 500 days, or about 18 months on the surface, 7 months back, a 2.5-year mission, so longer than the short stay mission, but you've been able to stay most of that mission on the surface of the planet, doing the science and all the things you want to do there. So let me give you an example of these two missions, and you could ask yourself, which one do you favor? So this mission here, the long stay mission, this is like taking your car to the beach. You drive to the beach, maybe you have a house rented there for a week. You stay for a week, it's lovely, you have a great time. You get back in your car and you take a quick 1 or 2 hour drive home. The other way, you drive your car to the beach, you stay there for about a minute, and then you drive your car home via Alice Springs. So you can tell which way I like to go, right? I'll take the week at the beach. Okay, so there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that we understand the problem, we understand the engineering, we understand the physics. The other part of the good news is we have some of the vehicles already in production. This big launch vehicle here is called the Space Launch System, the SLS. NASA right now is developing this vehicle, and we're going to fly it for the first time in about 2 years from now. So the SLS will be the biggest launch vehicle ever flown from this planet, even bigger than the Saturn V that took us to the moon. NASA is also developing a new spacecraft called Orion. And Orion is our replacement for the space shuttle, and it's meant to be designed to take people into deep space. So where the shuttle just took you into orbit around the Earth, Orion could take you to the moon. It could also be part of the mission to take you to Mars. The bad news is there's two other pieces we need, and we don't have those yet. We need some sort of transit habitat, transit vehicle that will take you from the Earth all the way out to Mars. We don't have that vehicle yet. We have to work on that. And we don't have a Mars lander yet, although we do know how to do landers pretty well. And so there's an example of a Mars lander. So those two vehicles on the left, they're in production right now. We're working on them, so we're about halfway to having the vehicles that we need to go to Mars, and then the vehicles on the right we still have to work on. Unfortunately, we don't have one of these. We do actually have people at NASA working on warp drive, though. So that's a good thing. We don't have Matt Damon either, but I think if we called him up, maybe he'd help us out for this mission. So that's just a quick 10-minute rocket science lesson. So I now pronounce all of you rocket scientists because you understand the physics of going to Mars. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I think you made it so attractive that a number of people may come and buy a ticket in a few minutes by you. You showed the humans on Mars, and that is the second aspect, of course. People will have to live on Mars with all the challenges. And in order to show these challenges in a nutshell, like you did on the rocket science, we have another expert here, this time on the human side, of the human life science side. Professor Gilles Clement is an expert in physiology. He is now at this moment Director of Research in Lyon in France, in the Neurosciences Research Center, so you see his specialty, neurosciences. And also he's a consultant at NASA Human Research Operations. Now, I think he's one of the persons who did most of the experiments in life sciences in space. There are not many who can beat him, I think, as principal investigator, because he already is doing experiences in space with astronauts since 1982. That means he has experience and experiments on board of Salyut, of Mir, Space Lab, Shuttle, International Space Station, the whole range. He didn't have an experiment on this last vehicle of John yet, but that's the next on his list. That will be a fast one. By the way, he's also served as a professor in Strasbourg as ISU. He's a long-standing ISU faculty. He was resident professor life sciences. And just to make a little bit of a commercial, he's also the author of probably the best and most written book on space medicine and best sold book. So welcome, Professor Gilles Clement.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Walter, for these kind words. So my challenge is in 5 minutes to tell you everything we know about humans in space. And if I can have my first slide. Just press here. All right. So we have learned a lot. When I say we, it's the science community. We have learned a lot since the first human space flight, Yuri Gagarin, on 12th of April of 1961. That was 55 years ago. And since Yuri Gagarin, who was the first, there are 545 other people who have been in space. Total is 546 today. And 10% of them, 60 female. Now, most of the astronauts, when they are selected to fly several times in space. And in general, they fly 2 to 3 times. So the total number of human flights, the total of tickets, if you want, that have been given to people to go in space is about 1,225 people. Again, about 10% of female. Now, if you had the time spent by all of these people in space, add together, you get a total of 128 years. That means it's all the information we have about human in space is equivalent to 128 years of a single individual. Now, not all of the cosmonauts or astronauts were subject to experiments on human physiology and space medicine during their flights. So the data we have today, when we talk about human in space, scientific data, correspond to less than a lifetime in one single person. So that's not a lot of information. And about 10% of that for female, corresponding to about 10 years of a person, a female person in space, of one single person in space. So we know very little yet about, even if we have accumulated data over the past 55 years, we still have very little information about how the human body adapts to spaceflight, and in particular weightlessness. Now, in terms of duration, the longest flight by a single person was 14 months by the gentleman that you see in this picture, Valery Polyakov, who spent 14 months on board Mir continuously. But it was his second flight. Before he did these 14 months, he had been in space previously for 8 months. So the total spent by Valery Polyakov in space is about 22 months. And he's not the one with the record. The one with the longest duration spent in zero-G over several missions is Gennady Pedalka, with 5 flights on board the ISS. So the total of his flight is 27 months. And 27 months, 27 to 30 months, is about the duration of a mission to Mars today. That's what we are planning to. So only maybe one person has reached this duration in multiple flights. So this simple graph shows that the duration of the flight for all those 548 individuals who have been in space, and 2 of them were fortunate enough to have in this room, and the number is plotted here too. The majority of people who have been in space have flown for very short duration mission. Most of them on the space shuttle for mission that lasted 1 to 2 weeks, or on Soyuz. And we start to see another population of astronauts who have been in space for longer duration, and those are the mission on Mir and the ISS right now, where the duration is 6 months. But by far, all the information we have collected, an astronaut and cosmonaut, is for very short duration mission in the order of 10 days or so, which poses a problem, because that's, again, on the left is the histogram, the number of people who have flown and the duration of their flight. We can tell from the histogram here that there are about 75 astronaut or flight that has taken place for 6 months. 75 individuals have been in space for 6 months. Only a handful have been in space for a year, and only 1 for 14 months. Yet we are talking about missions that are 30 months in duration. So we are very far from knowing everything that is going to happen. Now, what happens in people when they are in space? A lot of changes occur throughout the body. I'm not going to review in details all of this, but mostly at the beginning of the flight, astronauts get motion sick when they move. They get disoriented. There is also a fluid shift. The blood tends to be in the upper part of the body, created some congestion, like having a cold or feeling you're upside down. Their muscle atrophy, also due to this redistribution of fluid, but also to the fact that they don't use their leg muscles to walk or to run in space. They are free floating, basically, in weightlessness. There is also a loss in the mineral of the bone, and there is a calcium that comes in the blood that can create kidney stones, so a lot of situations like that. And in addition, they are exposed to stress of working in an isolated and confined environment, and they are exposed to higher radiation than on Earth. So a lot of challenges that we have been fortunate enough have not made too dangerous, the mission in low Earth orbit, but will become more and more serious for the longer the missions. What we expect, the biggest challenges for a mission to Mars with humans on board will be the radiation dose. During the transit, during the journey to Mars and back, and also on the surface, the level of radiation will be about 1,000 more than it is on Earth. And the duration is long, 3 years. So you may expect an increase in the probability of getting a cancer after these missions of 20% compared to what we have here on the ground. Also, right now on the ISS, the food that the astronauts eat is brought during every logistic mission, supporting missions. So the food comes from the Earth, the water and the air is partially recycled on board the ISS, but a lot of resources still come from the Earth. On a mission to Mars, it won't be possible. You have to wait a long time before getting what you need if it was not planned in advance. So we have to think about systems that can be completely recycle the air, the water, and the food and the waste that is produced. And finally, there is also a lot of research done in the space suit and the tool used to do this search for life. The objective of going to Mars is to do scientific research, geological research, biological research to look for the origin of life. Definitely the suits that were used during the Apollo mission on the moon were designed for short duration spacewalk. You can see on the left here an astronaut suit on the moon. The suit is covered with this regolith, the dust, that can be very abrasive and bad for your health if you inhale it. And they will bring a lot of this inside of the airlocks of the module on the moon. So definitely new systems have to be designed, especially if we want astronauts to climb, to do some more exploration than they did on the moon's surface. So those are the challenges for a human Mars mission. There is a lot of research going on right now around the world in various space agencies to tackle these issues before we can start the voyage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gilles. Thank you, Gilles. So that was it. First in a nutshell. For those who want to know more, next year we have a program of 5 weeks called SHSSP, so please come and join us next year. Now, you saw all the challenges for astronauts, but don't worry, most of them survive. And we have two excellent ones here. So let me first call up Professor Jean-Jacques Favier. Jean-Jacques Favier has a PhD in engineering and a PhD in physics with specialization in material sciences, metallurgy, crystallography. As a material scientist, he worked on a number of projects, and one of the projects he worked on was a joint project between CNES and NASA, which is called Mephisto. Now, he had the enormous privilege, I think, that he was able to join his project in space. Most of the time it's the opposite. And when the project flew, he was assigned as payload specialist to the mission STS-78, where he was then doing this and other experiments. During this mission, which was, by the way, the longest one, which at that moment of a shuttle mission for 16 days, he was, by the way, also meeting his other friend here, which is in the room, and which I will present afterwards. At the moment after his flight, Professor Favier became director of CNES, and now recently he has joined ISU. He was already faculty for many years, but he has joined ISU and is helping ISU at the moment to boost research as director of research in ISU. So if I can invite you, Dr. Favier. And as I said, we have a second astronaut today, namely Dr. Thirsk, Bob Thirsk. Bob Thirsk is the real ISU example of an interdisciplinary person. I don't think there are many people here in the room who are mechanical engineer, medical doctor, and have an MBA. Well, he has it, so that is an example of an ISU faculty. Although we don't have so many as you, I must say. He became a Canadian astronaut from the Canadian Space Agency, CSA, and you heard the name already. The first time he flew was on the same STS-78 as Professor Favier, so that's a fantastic coincidence that you have here now in Adelaide two astronauts who met themselves first in space. Well, they met themselves before, and now 20 years later meet themselves in Adelaide. So that's something which I think should go into the records of Adelaide. Afterwards, he did a longer duration flight on board of ISS. So if I take, and I cheat a little bit with a few hours, if you don't mind, Bob, he was nearly 205 days in space, 204 in a few hours. But let's say 205 days in space. He's a long-term ISU faculty, and at the moment is also the Chancellor of the Calgary University in Canada.
In Calgary.
So if I may invite you, Bob, to join us. So as I said, I guess one of the few astronauts in the world who ever were able to develop a scientific project and a scientific instrument and was then able to work on that instrument in space is, in my opinion, Professor Favier. Maybe you can explain how that came about?
Yeah, thank you, Pete, Walter. So I'm pleased to be here again. This is my third visit here in Adelaide, joining this particular program I like very much. I try when I come and in other occasions to talk a little bit about science and research related to the human space flights and the human missions. Because we have very often other contributors, other astronauts who are talking more about the engineering and so on. But if we go into space, it is for several reasons, and one of these reasons is to better understand the environment or to better understand the science which goes with the space program. So in my particular case, as an expert in material sciences, so I spent the first part of my career as a scientist preparing space experiments for different programs. Programs with the CNES, the French Space Agency, ESA, European Space Agency, NASA, the Russians also, Roscosmos, and so on. But at the end, I was preparing the experiments, but at the end, I was a little bit frustrated because I had to pass, actually, the experiments to the astronauts who will fly them. So this frustration was something that I wanted to go through, and when the French Space Agency, the CNES, and NASA decided to open the astronaut selection to scientists, not only to pilots and engineers, so I applied, and I was lucky to be selected. I was selected to run experiments in my field, in physics, and in the case of this particular mission, so we had 3 experiments from my lab on board, so I was lucky to be able to perform them during the flight. So this is maybe one of the few cases of astronauts who have prepared their own experiments. They flew them, and after the flight, who analyzed all experiments. Of course, I have been selected on this flight not only for my 3 experiments, because we have so many other experiments to perform. Together, we had 43 experiments on this flight. But I was there, and I was able to go all around the loop, you know, from preparation of the experiments on the ground, flight, and then analysis and exploitation of the experiment afterwards.
That's quite a unique story, Jean-Jacques.
Yeah.
Bob, how did you come to the astronaut corps?
Well, first of all, Walter, I just want to say thank you to everyone for showing up this evening. It's gratifying to know there's such strong interest in the space program in Australia. I feel so comfortable. This is my 2nd visit to Adelaide. There's a common history, I think, between Canadians and Australians, so I feel so relaxed and amongst kindred spirits here, so thank you. I also noticed there's several school-age children that are here this evening as well. So the answer to your question, Walter, is that I was a grade 3 student. I went into my classroom one day on the west coast of Canada, and my school teacher announced that all of us were going to be taking part in an important event a little bit later in the morning via the classroom radio. So halfway through the morning, my teacher turned on the classroom radio, And all of us in the class listened to the voice of one person that seemed to be talking to another group of people somewhere else. The teacher mentioned to us that this was the voice of an astronaut who had just launched in space. His name was John Glenn, and he was speaking to another group of people at another place around the Earth, in a place called Mission Control. And they were speaking all this terminology and jargon, and none of us knew what they were talking about, but the teacher took the moment to explain what this realm called space was all about and what this profession of astronaut was all about. So I decided when I was in grade 3 that if I ever had the chance that I'd sure like to become an astronaut. You know, it's not just wishing on a star. You have to get yourself an education. So when you talk about my educational background, that was part of the requirement to be selected eventually as a Canadian astronaut. When I was 30 years old, the Canadian Space Agency decided it was time to have our own astronaut program. So I applied with 4,000 other people, and again, with a lot of luck, I was selected and had the opportunity to fly in 2 space missions eventually.
Yes, thinking so early to become an astronaut must be an inspiration for a youngster, so you can have the idea and materialize it. That's the thing. Jean-Jacques, you have another reputation besides a scientific one.
A good one,
Is
I
that,
suppose.
yes, a very good one. Is that you are bringing goat cheese on board.
Oh, yeah. This is another story. But this is a very serious one, actually. Yeah, I have, as you said, a PhD degree and so on, but I am very proud also to be a member of the French Goat Cheese Brotherhood. Okay? So, as such, I consider that I'm the ambassador of the French goat cheese around the world, and I thought it would maybe, my flight will maybe be a good opportunity for people to know more about goat cheese. So the idea was to bring some pieces on board, and at the end we had 17 days in space, so I brought 17 pieces cheese, different cheese, so a lot, you know. And the argument I had to convince NASA, because all the food that you bring into space has to go through a laboratory for analysis and so on. The argument I had was a scientific one, a very serious one. So Gilles told you that the astronauts are losing calcium in space, and I thought, I have the good solution. So if we give some cheese to the astronauts during the flight, probably they will be in better health after flight. So by the way, we were able to get that, and I think we all enjoyed. And now all the crew, because we had a post-tour after the flight in the different countries where the experiments have been prepared. So the astronauts and Bob came to France, and is now a member of the French Goat Cheese Brotherhood.
Bob, I guess like the other Canadians, you didn't manage to get a canoe on board, but still, did you manage to get some similar story?
Yes. So, you know, Dr. Gilles Clement has explained a little bit what some of the difficulties are of flying in space. And, you know, think of this room here. The air is being exchanged continually all the time. You know, there's probably maybe over a 24-hour period of time, maybe 4 or 5 exchanges of air. But on a spacecraft, it's a small cabin, and it's the air that you launch with is the air that you have for your 17 days or your 205 days in space. So when you fly something like goat cheese, you have to think about the odor in the air. On this first flight, STS-78, Jean-Jacques and I were both rookies, so we didn't know a whole lot. And when NASA mentioned to us that each of us could fly one national food item of our choice, Jean-Jacques, as he just explained, decided to fly goat cheese, which is wonderfully nutritious, but it has a bit of an odor. And I decided, being a Canadian, I was going to fly smoked salmon. A bit of an odor. One person on our crew, Susan Helms, a very distinguished, accomplished, incredible astronaut, said, "Over my dead body." because of this closed cabin environment. She didn't want our national food stinking up the cabin. But we used arguments such as the ones that Jean-Jacques used about nutrition and all that, and finally she said yes. So during the flight, of the two national food items that were the favorites were the goat cheese and the smoked salmon. Everyone loved that. Several years later, I was working in mission control as a Capcom. It's one of the positions that in mission control that speaks with the crew on orbit. And Susan Helms, our STS-78 crew member, was on orbit. So she recognized my voice and she called down. She said, "Bob, is that you on console?" I said, "Yes, it is." "Hi, Susan." She said, "Can you get me some of that smoked salmon?"
I guess that many people in the public would be eager to ask questions to both of you, so I'm not going to take the time off. Are there any questions from the public for one of the two astronauts? I didn't know that Australians were shy. I've met so many Australians. I've never seen a shy one, so this is the first one.
Lovely to meet you. I'm really interested about your training to become an astronaut, whether you trained in any particular breathing techniques or breath work to reduce stress or for any particular situations you might find yourself in. And if you did, which modalities you actually drew upon?
So the question is there any countermeasures against stress, against things, and what is done in the training, just for the audience? Bob, as a medical doctor?
You're absolutely right. Stress management is an important selection criteria for astronauts, but even amongst those that are selected, we try to receive some training in it. It's important that all astronauts monitor their stress. A little bit of stress in life is good, as you know. It helps us to perform at an optimal level, but too much stress causes our performance to fall off, so we have to manage our stress. Not all people use breathing techniques in order to manage stress, but we do a number of other things, making sure that we have some recreational time on orbit. Exercising psychologically has been very helpful. My Canadian colleague, Chris Hadfield, took music into space and diverted his time with that. Other people do silly astronaut tricks in space and make videos of that. And a friend of mine played chess with the Earth. I can think of, during my selection period, one of the tests to screen out claustrophobia was they put us inside this about a 1 meter sphere and inflated the sphere, and they had us all monitored with physiological monitoring equipment to try to identify those of us that might have problems with claustrophobia. And I'm not claustrophobic at all, but I just did some mindfulness type of breathing exercises just to try to maintain my physiological signals nice and low so I would not be disqualified. And I know other crewmates practice yoga, and there's some breathing exercises associated with that as well.
Jean-Jacques, you had any stress preparation, or you didn't have stress?
Well, I try not to be too much stressed, but yes, I remember that what Bob was just saying. The first simulation test we got was the claustrophobia test, the one in which we had, I remember it's not even 1 meter diameter, it's 85 centimeters diameter. I remember it because with my size, it was not easy at all to get in. And 85 centimeters, this is the diameter of the hatch of the shuttle in case we have to get out of it. So, but as you, Bob, I'm not very, well, but the claustrophobia is not something I have too many problems to fight. So I was okay. I think even I fell asleep during the test itself. So NASA had to ring me in order to say, it's finished, now we get out.
Okay, any other questions? You direct the microphones.
In space, you don't have any natural day and night. How do you keep your circadian rhythms entrained?
We cannot understand the question here.
You have to turn the volume up for the AV tech. Turn the volume way up.
In space, you don't have any natural day and night. How do you keep your circadian rhythms entrained?
Circadian rhythms. So in space, we don't have regular terrestrial like day-night cycles. How do we manage circadian rhythms in space? You're absolutely right. The spacecraft in low Earth orbit will do one orbit around the Earth every 90 minutes. So half of that time, 45 minutes, is spent in the Earth's shadow, so in darkness, and then the other 45 minutes will be spent in sunlight or daytime. So that means that throughout the day, we're having light streaming in and out. So that doesn't really help set our circadian rhythm very well. Aboard the International Space Station, we all live according to Greenwich Mean Time, or UTC time. It's compromised from all the various countries that are involved in the program. And so we get adapted to that. And we try to have our breakfast, our lunch, and our dinners according to that schedule, and have our off time, in the evenings and the mornings as well. The difficulty arises when we're visited by another spacecraft, either a Soyuz vehicle or, in the old days, the space shuttle, or a cargo vehicle. Because for reasons that it's going to take too long to explain, the onboard crew has to adapt our time to that of the oncoming vehicle. And that was tough. So in some cases, we might only have to change our circadian rhythms by a couple hours. Sometimes it's by 11 hours or 13 hours. And that was tough. So I remember one time we're going to have to do a massive sleep change. And on the ground, when I travel intercontinental, I take a medication, a sleeping medication called Ambien. I just typically take about half an Ambien. I go to bed. I read a book for 20 minutes until I feel a little bit dozy. Close the book, turn off the light, and go to sleep. So because we had this massive sleep shift coming up, I took a full Ambien and was going to get ready to go to sleep for 11 hours or so. So I went to my computer and did a little bit of email in the middle of the US laboratory just until I felt dozy. The next morning I got up and I was floating through the station, and my friend Mike Barrett came up to me and said, "Good morning, Bob. Do you remember going to bed last night?" "Oh, good question. No, I don't." He said, "I found you sleeping in the middle of floating in the middle of the US lab, sound asleep. So I dragged you by your earlobe into your sleep station." So just to answer your question, there are circadian rhythm disruptions in space. The light is one thing that you mentioned. The forced sleep shift changes due to oncoming vehicles, and I think stress and fatigue probably plays a role in disrupting our sleep cycles as well, and then internal hormones as well, which are disrupted in space.
Any more questions? I see a few questions there from the youngsters. Yeah.
What do you do for fun?
Fun? Jean-Jacques, what do you do for fun? On board of the space station, of course.
Okay. Well, I flew a shuttle mission, a short mission compared to the one that the astronauts had from the space station months and so on. So we were busy all the time. I mean, we were supposed to work 8 hours a day. In our case, we worked up to 14 hours a day. So in that case, the time to have fun was very limited. We were supposed to have 8 hours sleep, and lucky for us, during that period of time, so Houston, the control center, didn't call us. So we were just by ourselves. So instead of going to bed, having sleep, we were spending some time relaxing together, or most of the time looking at the window. Okay, because during the day, the working day, it was impossible, especially in the space lab. The laboratory, which was in the cargo bay of the shuttle, has no window, just a very small one at the end. So we spent most of our time going to the flight deck, where the big windows for flying the shuttle are situated, and from there we were able to see everything. The Earth, of course, interesting to check. It takes you 2 or 3 days to be comfortable with the relative position of the shuttle, the spacecraft, and the Earth. And after that, you recognize everything. And interesting also is not only to look at the Earth, but to look at the dark side of the sky to see all the stars. This was very impressive.
Thank you. The lady has a question. Wait for the microphone.
You kind of already just hinted on advanced working, but is there something that you've done really surprising about being in space for the first time? Like maybe your response to things or just the environment, or what was really surprising?
Yes, there's all kinds of surprises. And it doesn't matter how many movies you see before launch, how many books you read, how many people you talk to before launch, there's always surprises. And I think the biggest surprise occurred on the first night aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia. So I went to bed, and what we typically do is we put an eye shade over our eyes for the reason about the light streaming in periodically. And we also put in earplugs into our ears as well, because there's loud ambient noise aboard a spacecraft due to the life support system. There's always fans and motors and pumps that are going all the time. And I was getting ready, I was in my sleeping bag getting ready to fall asleep, and all of a sudden I saw this lightning bolt in my eye. And, well, that's curious. And then I waited about 3 minutes later, in the other eye, there's another lightning bolt in my eye. And then this sparkle. And I thought to myself, what in the world is going on here? And I'm a little bit nearsighted, so I know I'm at risk of having a detached retina. And I thought, oh my God, I'm getting a detached retina. It's the first night in space. They're going to have to declare a medical emergency, and we're going to have to abort the mission and go home after 1 day of this 17-day mission. So I thought, what do I do here? So while I was thinking about what I should do, eventually I fell asleep. About half an hour later, I got up again, and the lightning bolts were still there, like every 3 or 4 minutes. So I thought, I better get up and report this to the crew commander. So I got up, and I woke up Tom Hendricks, our crew commander, said, Tom, I'm sorry, but I think my retina is detaching. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, I see these lightning bolts in my eyes. He started to laugh. He said, Bob, that's ionizing radiation. It's hitting... ionizing radiation particles are hitting the rods and the cones in the back of your eye and causing those little sparkles there. It happens to everyone. Sorry, I didn't tell you about this before. So that was a relief, but I also felt very embarrassed.
Next question, please.
Yeah, over there.
Oh, okay.
There.
So my question is both for Jean-Jacques and Bob. A lot of people that I've heard talking about space say that it changes them, that looking down to the Earth where you can't see any borders or any countries or any wars, it changes you. So I just wanted to know if your perspective on life changed after having seen the Earth from space.
Yeah, good question. As Bob said already, I saw and we saw a lot of movies, pictures of the Earth from space before the flight. So I knew what I could expect. But being there and looking with my own eyes, you know, I saw something different. I can tell you, it's even how to say that, it is it's still nicer than you could expect, you know. The colors first of this fragile planet, okay? So you realize how fragile the planet is. You are able to see just by your naked eye the pollution in a certain part of the world. You see also very well the fires of the deforestation in Amazon, for instance. This was something which impressed me a lot, you know, because you see fires everywhere around this planet, in Africa, in Europe, in the United States, But in Amazonia, there's just a front of fire, you know, devastating everything, because you realize the scale of this. And when you say that to people in the other countries, in Europe, for instance, talking about deforestation in Amazonia, they say, well, it's very, very far away. But when we are on shuttle, it takes you only 10 minutes to go from South America to Europe, you know. So you realize how small this world is, how fragile it is, and probably this is what changed me the most was the vision of the fragility and the environment. Yeah.
Next question. See the lady there, yeah?
Thank you very much for sharing your experiences with us. My question relates to some of your ergonomic challenges in performing daily activities when you're in space. Cleaning your teeth, changing your clothes, if you do that, you know, those sorts of things. Could you share some of those with us, please?
Bob, you were there for a long time, so you must have changed clothes a few times.
Well, I'm really delighted that you asked that question, because you're actually thinking ahead. What impact does a weightless environment have on your daily activities, let alone trying to operate an experiment? Something as simple as going to the bathroom on Earth takes maximum 5 minutes. In space, it would take you 20 minutes to do that. So, for example, to go to the bathroom, do number 2, you would sit on a toilet seat that looks very similar to the one that you have at home, except that it's made out of rubber, and you have to get a perfect seal between your bottom and the seat. And you put your feet into some foot restraints, you put some restraints over your thighs, and when you're comfortable that you have got a good seal, then you open up a valve and turn on a couple of large fans that are underneath the toilet, because in a weightless environment, you can imagine that things don't fall down. They just sort of hang there. And so you have to, if you don't have the effect of gravity there, you have to have another force, which in our case is air convection. And the air convection tries to draw the waste away from your bottom. It kind of tickles your bottom. The air current, and sometimes the waste comes up and revisits you. And then when you finish, you close the valve off, and you expose the bottom part of the toilet to vacuum. You don't dump the waste overboard, but you expose it to vacuum so it sort of freeze dries. It makes it a little more compact. So that's just going to the bathroom. Brushing your teeth. On Earth, after you brush your teeth, you always spit out your toothpaste into a basin. You can't do that in space. You have a choice. You either swallow it or you spit it into a towel, which is now unusable. Clothing in space, we don't have a washing machine or a dryer, so therefore we have to discard our clothes afterwards. That's the bad news. The good news is that you can wear your clothes longer, so we can typically wear underwear for a week, and shirts are good for 3 weeks. And the reason for that is that in a weightless environment, shirts and clothes tend to float off of you, so they're not there absorbing all the perspiration, the sweat all the time. So you can usually get about 3 weeks worth out of clothing. We also use special clothing in space as well with silver threads in it. Silver is a bacteriostatic, so that's helpful as well. So if you're the kind of person that would like to stay at the Intercontinental Adelaide on all your vacations, you're not astronaut material. But if you like rustic wilderness camping in the outback, you're the right stuff.
Next question. I think in the back of the room, yeah?
How many thousand photographs did you take while you were up there?
I didn't see where the question came from, but I heard the question, how many thousands of photographs did you take when you were up there? I'm guessing that during my 6-month expedition, I probably took 30,000. And I would say that maybe 5,000 of those were on-orbit crew activities, documenting experiments and crew life. and then the other ones were out the window. I, like Jean-Jacques, like to spend my free time looking out the window at this beautiful planet down below, and it's really tough because of our type A behavior personality not to have a camera in your hand at the same time. By the way, it's the space program is civilian, so if any of you wish to see some of those photographs, well, you saw a few of them tonight, but you can also go to the website of the various space agencies and get a close-up view of what life in space is all about. The European Space Agency has also got a 3D camera and a 3D video camcorder, so they got some pretty amazing 3D views that can really put you right there.
Jean-Jacques, you took pictures? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I don't remember how many we took, but well, when you are working, this is part of your job, as Bob said, to document the experiments or the other making the experiments. So we have a lot of pictures done in this context. And for outside, we had in our flight, shuttle flight, we had 2 opportunities to make pictures in order to, as NASA says, document some different places down. Of course, there are other ways actually to get pictures from space, from this planet taken from space with the automatic satellites. But something which is interesting is instead of looking down like a satellite is doing most of the time, we from the spacecraft, from the shuttle or space station, we could actually take pictures in such a way that we could see some details which are not the usual way the satellites are taking the pictures. So this is why NASA is asking us also from time to time to document some regions. And the other good reason to make pictures is just for fun, just for yourself, of course. If you have a chance to be on the right time, just over your hometown, your house and so on. So you take a lot of pictures, I can tell you. But if you come too late by a couple of seconds, what is too late? You don't get your town or you don't get your house.
How's it going?
Next question, please.
Speaking to food variety, aside from the national cuisine you get to take up with you, which I hope they give you really good rates for delivery for, what's the bread and butter like? What's the standard meal like? And how many different types of supplements do you take to, boost the lack of vitamins and minerals?
The menu has really improved over the decades of human spaceflight, and I think that the inventory or the menu is probably maybe 140, 160 items right now. But again, as I mentioned a minute ago, living in space is a little bit like wilderness camping. So there is no fridge, there's no freezer aboard any spacecraft for food storage. So all of the food aboard must have a very long shelf life, months, and therefore restricted to thermal stabilized food, or irradiated food, or freeze-dried food, the camping type of food that you're probably familiar with if you go camping. It doesn't taste exactly like a home-cooked meal, but it's not bad. Good examples would be beef stroganoff, shrimp cocktail, miso soup. Those are some of my favorites. I think that when we talk about the Mars mission, and John talked about some of the challenges of getting to Mars, another challenge is going to be food as well, because we don't have a spacecraft big enough to take all of the pre-processed food to Mars. So we're going to have to think about growing crops on Mars as well. So that'll be another challenge that we'll have to develop as well. So the food is nutritious, high in protein, low in salt, high in phosphates, low in calcium. In terms of supplements we take vitamin D every day because we're living in a tin can without exposure to sunlight. And more recently, we're starting to take a medication called alendronate, which helps to, is a countermeasure against the bone demineralization problem that Dr. Clement talked about briefly.
Yep.
What was it like when you actually first got out of Earth's orbit and into open space? Did it feel really weird that you were as light as a feather?
Jacques, you.
Talking about the launch.
No. Think by floating. If you felt like
floating. Okay. Well, we when we are in orbit, of course, so we are under microgravity conditions. As we are floating, it's possible to float. Not only the astronauts, but everything you have around you is submitted to the same conditions. So we, during the training, have the opportunity to actually test these conditions in what we call the zero-G parabolic flights. In airplanes, which are just doing parabola like this, and during the parabolic phase of the flight, so you can experience already zero-G. But one parabola lasts about 20 seconds, okay? But you can make several in a row during this flight. So we were already, in my case, I was already prepared to these conditions. But of course, when you experience that full time, there's still something else. You know, if you want to move in a cabin or in a space lab or in a space station, you just push with your finger on one of the wall, and you go up to the other end. And even at the beginning of the mission, we have to be careful because we push too hard, you know, and therefore we being on the other wall on other astronauts. And this was something I didn't like much for my science, because I was in charge of the microgravity part of the program, and each time I had some critical phases for the experiment, so I asked the crew not to move, to keep quiet in order for me to get the best microgravity conditions for the experiment. But it is funny actually to be able to move just like this.
Yeah. Oh.
What did it feel like when you were blasting off?
What did it feel like blasting off? So I'll tell you about our shuttle launch. 6 seconds before liftoff, the computer on board the shuttle sends a signal to the 3 main engines to ignite. And they ignite, and then the computer checks to make sure that each of the 3 engines over the next 3-second period of time reaches at least 90% of their rated thrust. And then if they do, then at 0.3 of a second before liftoff, the computer sends a signal to the 2 solid rocket boosters. They look like Roman candles on either side of the shuttle stack to ignite, and they immediately reach 100% thrust. So there's now 4 million pounds of thrust trying to lift the shuttle off the launch pad. But there's 8 bolts that are about this size that are holding the shuttle down to the launch pad. So at T equals 0, they explode, and there's now nothing holding the shuttle down to the launch pad. So we lift off. It feels like a kick in the seat of the pants. So that was kind of a bit of an experience. A lot of shaking, and a lot of vibration, a lot of noise, and then a lot of pressure on our chest. I had put a checklist in front of my face on the wall in the middeck. It had the emergency procedures that I'd have to follow if something went wrong. But they were going like this. I couldn't read them. So the first 2 minutes are very bumpy, very loud. And then after 2 minutes, those 2 solid rocket boosters, they've used up all of their propellant. So we don't want to take empty rocket casings up to space, so we jettison them. And we continue the rest of the way up to orbit on the 3 main engines. It's a lot smoother ride then. But because we're burning propellant at such a rapid rate, 11 tons per second, you'll learn about Newton's second law when you get a little bit older. And it says that as your mass drops, your acceleration will go up. So the accelerations on our chest are getting bigger and bigger, and you have to really work at getting the air into your lungs. And then at 8.5 minutes, we're in space. So we go from 3 Gs to 0 Gs in an instant like that. We're all wearing a harness that holds us in our seat, but when we go to 0 G, all of a sudden we're flung forward in our seats. And then, as Jean-Jacques said, we undo our harness and we can just move around with just a push off the wall, flying around like Superman. And there's a lot of yelling and screaming and hollering and back slaps and high fives because we just survived one of the more dangerous things that humans do. So that was what launch is like. Over the side.
For as long as I can remember, I've dreamt to go to space. I believe at some point in your life, before you were an astronaut, you had this dream. But now that you've been to space, what's your new dream, or if you may say that, or that's a secret, you can keep it.
Okay. So I think we've realized a dream, becoming astronauts, and now that we're no longer astronauts, what are our next dreams in life?
As in, like, you've already been to space, you've already been an astronaut, so what's your next dream? What's the new dream?
So my dream was always to be an astronaut since I was young, but I think if you take a step back, I think it's a better way to describe me is someone who's interested in exploration. So as an astronaut, I have a chance to push back frontiers, and space is one of those frontiers, but there's so many other frontiers that are out there as well. John and Gilles described some of the challenges that are out there that prevent you from going to Mars, and so I want to be part of the group that pushes back some of those frontiers and comes up with ways to get people safely to Mars and be able to enable them to thrive. But there's all kinds of other challenges, medical frontiers, the cure for cancer, what's the nature of consciousness, how can we eradicate infectious disease. There's physical frontiers, there's scientific frontiers, and there's social frontiers out there. And I just want to be able to contribute and push back frontiers.
Where do we have the microphone now at the moment?
In my case, I'm lucky also because since I'm very young, I had 2 dreams, and 2 complementary dreams. One was to fly into space. Second is, and was and still is, to make research. Okay, and in my case, I was able to do both at the same time. Now, I don't think that I will fly again. I would like to make a kind of space cowboy mission, you know, for senior astronauts like us. I'm ready to go tomorrow. But I think the probability is low, but I still have scientific research.
We were somewhere in the back with the microphone. The gentleman there, your choice. Lady? Yeah.
Hi. There was a discussion about the problems with health from being in space. So, however long you've been out of space now, have you noticed anything connected to health that might have arisen from being in space?
What are some of the health impacts of living in space? Dr. Clement described some of the impacts. The environmental things about space that have an impact on health are, number one, weightlessness. Secondly, ionizing radiation. And then the third thing I would say would be the psychological aspects of living in space. I think most of the change that happen to our human body due to weightlessness are reversible once you get back home. The one that we're a little bit worried about and they're not sure about is the impact of weightlessness on bones. So we know that we regain most of the bone calcium that we lost during spaceflight, but we're not absolutely sure that the rebuilt bone architecture is the same as it was pre-flight, and therefore the strength of the muscle of the bones may be less than it was pre-flight and could compromise us afterwards. So that's on my mind. The other thing about ionizing radiation, that's cumulative. You can't do anything about that. It's not reversible. So we are at slightly higher risk of developing cataracts in our eyes and changes to our genetic reproductive organs. For someone my age, that's not a big deal. For a young person, it is a big deal. And then there's certain cancers that are radiation sensitive, so thyroid cancer, leukemia. Once per year, we go to our flight surgeon and we have a head-to-toe medical exam with laboratory tests so that if any of these nasty things occur, then they can hopefully get spotted early and we can get treated. And then the last thing is a psychological aspect. You know, Jean-Jacques answered the question about whether or not we have any change in perspective. And I think we do. My wife tells me that I still haven't returned from spaceflight, although it's been 5 years now. And that's because, I don't know, my mind is still in space. I have more of a global awareness of the world without borders and you know, some of the environmental damage that Jean-Jacques described. And she has trouble getting me to take out the garbage to the curb on Tuesday morning.
Okay, I'd like to have a last question maybe for Jean-Jacques, in view of the timing.
How do you communicate to people back on Earth that you might know?
How do we communicate? Well, when we were on the shuttle and now the space station, we are on the very low Earth orbit, meaning that we are not very far, 400 kilometers, okay? And so we are orbiting, but at the same time, there are a lot of telecommunication satellites that we can use in order to communicate with the ground. So we have almost a full coverage of the orbit, meaning that we are about 85, on the shuttle at least, on the orbit on which we were 85% of coverage, and therefore 85% of the time in direct communication with Houston, with the control center. Okay, we can also communicate with the families for private conversations, using the satellites also, but using more and more internet. Okay. So we have internet on board, and therefore we can follow the Facebook or Twitter and so on. But we should have time for that. So this is what the astronauts are doing after their work day.
I'm afraid we're getting close to our orbit of 90 minutes. So I think we have to close the session, whereby I thank all of you being here. I would like to thank especially Dr. Cable, who was, this event would not have been able without his support. And maybe, Dr. Cable, you would like to make some closing statement.
Yes, thanks, Walter, and thanks for giving us the opportunity for sponsoring this really fascinating event. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleague and fellow board member, Dr. Kate Manderson, who's come across from the East Coast to join us tonight. And ASAM, the Australasian Society of Aerospace Medicine, has been really proud to co-host this International Astronaut panel. So why is ASAM here? Well, Bob, you mentioned flight surgeons a moment ago. Well, ASAM is the organisation that represents about, well, more than 800 flight surgeons in Australia. We're a society of aerospace medicine that's existed in Australia since 1949, actually from humble beginnings, a small special interest group of the British Medical Association. The organisation transformed a number of times over the last 7 decades and became the Aviation Medical Society of Australia, then of Australia and New Zealand, and then finally the Australasian Society of Aerospace Medicine in 2003. And as I say, today we have more than 800 members, and after the Aerospace Medical Association of the US, we're the second largest organisation of that type in the world. And we have practitioners all over the world, from Asia to the Middle East to Europe, North America, and all over the Pacific. So we have grown a lot over the years. And the primary aims of the Society are to cultivate and promote the science of aerospace medicine, and related disciplines, and to provide an authoritative body of opinion in aerospace medicine. The two most important ways we do that is by hosting an annual scientific conference and publishing a peer-reviewed journal, which is the Journal of the Australasian Society of Aerospace Medicine. And just recently, of course, we had a wonderful opportunity to host a 3-day course intensive course in space medicine last week, where Bob and Gilles and Dr. Angie Buckley contributed as our lecturers, and we managed to inspire 40 doctors on that course to become advocates for space life sciences. So really, our presence here tonight really helps fulfil our role in raising awareness of the human challenges of manned spaceflight and aerospace medicine generally. So from a very small special interest group, which has now developed into a very large professional society, we aim to support the vitally important aerospace industry in the region, and hopefully ASAM will continue to have an important role, as it's clear that technology in aerospace will continue to advance and challenge human physiology as we move further into this new century. Having said that, finally I would like to ask for a vote of thanks for our presenters this evening, Dr. Bob Thirsk, Professor Jean-Jacques Favier, Dr. Gilles Clement, and John Connolly, and of course our moderator, Professor Walter Peeters. Please join me in thanking our presenters. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this evening as much as I have, and I thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you.
If anybody wants to have an autograph from the gentleman, we're going to put up a table, so don't crash them here in their seats, please. They survive space, so let them also survive Adelaide. And there will be an opportunity to have some pictures signed. So thank you very much for the questions and for the attention. Oh, Michael? Yeah?
Can I add my thanks to Gordon's, to our wonderful presenters this evening. And as Walter explained, you're all invited to obtain the autographs of our two astronauts, and you'll do that by coming down this side of the auditorium, and we'll set up a table on this side, is that right? Or just over here, and you'll be supplied with a colour photograph of our two astronauts and special pens. The participants, please hold back. You'll have your own opportunity to get autographs back at Mawson Lakes. And so anyone who is not obtaining an autograph is invited to join us for refreshments in the Kerry Packer Civic Gallery, which is up the stairs and on that side of the auditorium, for about half an hour. And then we'll go off and have dinner. So with that, I'd like to close this evening's session and thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't know we were going to cover the autograph stuff.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Walter.
Oh, that's Missy.